Welcome to No Apologies on BEK. I'm your host, Lori Hins. With me this evening in studio, very pleased to have our esteemed senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer, is with us and joins us. That's you. That would be
an esteemed one.
esteemed. No, this is the one.
Am I filling in for the esteemed one?
No, I'm pretty excited about having you here in studio. I think it's only like a couple of times that I've had you on the program, and it just worked out well over the weekend.
It did, and I always like going in studio if I can. Skype works or Zoom or whatever, but not as well as this.
Exactly. Well, we have so much to talk about, Kevin. And can I call you Senator Cramer? Or can I call you Kevin? I've known you.
Just don't call me esteemed anymore.
Okay.
Otherwise, Kevin's good.
All right. All right. Well, the Honorable Senator Kevin Cramer here. We can talk about China a little bit. You have been very vocal, and rightly so, and I'm so grateful. And speaking for the rest of the North Dakotans, we are very grateful for you being vociferous in your and adamant about your feelings about China and decoupling. Can we talk about decoupling and what that means, and how do we decouple from? We're so intertwined. I shop for clothes and I look at the label and I'm like, sorry, not going to buy that. It's from China.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And this is why I say strategically decouple or strategic decoupling from China. It's actually a term of art that I didn't invent. My friend Bob Lighthizer, you might recall Robert Lighthizer, he actually negotiated the U.S.-China trade deal in the Trump administration, and he was the U.S. trade representative, and that's his term. And he and I have talked a lot about strategic decoupling from China, and that's why it's obviously a long process, but it starts with a mindset. And I think we're there, Lori.
I think finally.
Right? Yeah. Finally. And in many respects, what happened with Fufeng and Grand Forks, while a painful experience for a lot of us in North Dakota, and certainly for the people of Grand Forks, I think became the symbol that told the rest of the country it's okay. It's okay to start thinking about alternatives to Chinese stuff.
And just to say no.
And just say no. Just say no. And then, of course, the spy balloon, right? At the very
the timing of that was really weird. I'm not going to lie. That was very odd.
I'd love to take credit, but I'm not nearly that smart.
Nor am I. I know. Now, the Fufeng project was finally stopped with the U.S. Air Force weighing in. Now, my question to you is, they weighed in, but it was very milquetoast. It was very generic in language.
Yeah, it's interesting because for a long time, for a year, I kept hearing from the community leaders in Grand Forks, we need something actionable. And what actionable meant to me was they wanted somebody, evidently, in some position of authority, to give them data or information that would allow them out of a contractual agreement. The Air Force didn't do that.
No,
in fact, all the Air Force really just stated their emphatic opposition, not even opposition. They just said it would be a significant security risk. But this wasn't a new message. Lori, first of all, this is intuitive to most people, right?
Like a lot of Grand Forks people.
Like a lot of Grand Forks people. God bless them first, by the way. They raised the alarm. They sounded the alarm. But even beyond that, remember, the Air Force is a citizen of Grand Forks in many respects. They're partners with Grand Forks. They're a stakeholder. That's their family in many respects. And they didn't want to do anything that would embarrass the community of Grand Forks. And I think they gave the city leaders multiple opportunities to back out of it gracefully. And eventually they couldn't any longer. They just had to put it on the line with this significant point, but they still didn't provide anything, quote, actionable. True. What they just presented was their opinion, which wasn't a new opinion. And I can point to lots of examples, but one that's probably the most prominent to me was early last year, maybe springtime last year sometime, in a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Of course, I'm on the committee. My colleague and friend, Tom Cotton, who's very senior on the committee, asked the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, C.Q. Brown, about Fufeng. And his response was crystal clear. I'd rather discuss that with you in a secure setting.
Yes.
Now, that hardly speaks, gee, this would be a swell idea, why don't you go ahead and do it? That's not the message you get from that. And so it's always sort of bothered me that for a year the city waited for somebody else to make a decision for them. And the only conclusion I could really draw from all of it was that the decision they wanted was for somebody to say it's okay to do it. And you notice with all the nuance, no one ever said that.
Right.
Even when General Atomics wrote a letter, similar to the Air Forces. General Atomics, a very important corporate citizen, defense contractor, renting space at Grand Forks
Right.
makes this very strong position known, and right away the community started getting suspicious about how did that come to be. And General Atomics, I helped get General Atomics to Grand Forks. In fact, I was very instrumental in getting General Atomics to Grand Forks, and it sort of bothered me to think that they were given so little regard in that letter. So anyway, the good news is we're where we are now.
Now, in addition to this 370 acres, which is now still owned by Fufeng,
Right.
still owned, we're thinking now in terms of North Dakota economic development
Yes.
about an American company or
Yes.
perhaps a friendly foreign, if it's a friendly.
Yeah, so it's a great point because I think it speaks to the broader U.S. alliance issue at a time when we are looking at these, pacing threats like China and these imminent threats like Russia, possible threats like North Korea and Iran. We need to start aligning ourselves with countries that share our values, as opposed to thinking we're going to win over countries who don't share our values. And so I think in the case of Grand Forks and those 370 acres, this is a wonderful opportunity once again for North Dakota to demonstrate we can work with not just America only, America first, doesn't mean necessarily America only,
right.
but at least with people who share our values.
I love that. America first, not America only. I'm going to remember that and use that and steal it.
It's all yours.
We are a true model in Grand Forks for the rest of the country. They can look at, if you see something, say something, they always say.
Yeah, right.
Well, they did for a year.
Yeah.
And truthfully, that is what more communities probably need to do. Open their eyes, be aware of what they see, and then say something about it.
It's pretty amazing, Lori, really, when you look at those people, how quickly they rose up,
Right.
how strong their voices were, how united, not a few, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of them were. And that's the first mystery to me, is how you miss that cue
Right.
in politics, particularly local politics. And
I don't know, some of those city council members were saying there were just 12 people who would show up all the time.
yeah,
That was the quote.
those 5,000 signatures would be hard for me to ignore. I know
Exactly.
that. But even that said, to the point of the model, I think you're exactly right. And I think Americans all over our country are looking at that, and they're looking at other instances where peaceful but passionate protest is an appropriate form of regress, of getting your message across when the people you've elected don't seem to be listening or representing. Now, at the same time, I think it's really important for people to understand that there's a lot of divergent views out there.
Well, that was
And
the
you need to
interesting
listen
thing
to all
about
of
the
it.
Grand Forks Coalition was it was made of completely divergent views.
Right.
There were, people who were economy people. There were people who were environmental people. There were
Right.
people who were water people.
Yep.
All of these different people, and they coalesced and came together with a common goal to, protect the country.
Well, common opposition is oftentimes a great way to rally people
Unifier.
and unify people. That's exactly right. And I think the China situation is one of those things that our country could rally, quote, against. But we also have to find out what we're for to counter. Because if we strategically decouple from China, we still have to buy stuff somewhere, and we still have to sell stuff somewhere. We just need to look for different alliances.
Welcome back to No Apologies. I am Lori Hinz, your host, and in studio with me is Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, the junior senator. Just remember that, and when you think that you're old, you're
Okay,
just
let's
still
go.
the junior
Let's get
senator.
back to esteemed. No.
Or honorable, I could say that too. There are so many interesting things to talk about, and I was really struggling with what to speak because I, of course, wanted to talk to you about Fufeng, which we did in the last segment, but there are so many things going on nationally. The weakness that our country is showing right now with the administration is terrifying to me, and it must be far more horrible for you who gets the intel and the skiff
Yeah, right.
briefings, because I can't even fathom the type of things that you're probably hearing.
It's interesting, Lori, the advantage of getting classified briefings is you see what's really going on in the military apart from the politics of it. To me, I think the worst harm that's been done in the last several months with regard to international affairs, to national defense, isn't even the spy balloon's ability to spy on us. What's most concerning is that the Chinese felt bold enough to do it.
Right?
Right.
And the reaction
and the
was
reaction
so slow. And that's what they're watching.
That's what they're watching. So people should find assurances in knowing that our intelligence community knew about the program, saw the balloon from its takeoff, and then that our Northcom military saw it as it was coming our way. What's concerning is that the intelligence community and the military weren't communicating across political lines. And that's something we've got to fix. We have got to work on that. The other thing, though, the biggest problem was, to your point, was the poor reaction politically by the White House especially. And the reputational harm that does to us on the global stage is far worse than any pictures that the Chinese might have gotten of an ICBM silo, because there are 450 of them and they're not exactly in secret locations. So I doubt they gleaned much, particularly knowing it was coming our direction. Things were pretty well locked down, shut down. They likely didn't get much intel. In fact, we likely get more from knowing it was there. But that said, the harm is to our reputation, which is not insignificant, because our deterrence the deterrence of other nations is largely based on our reputation.
100%. I know that. I just came a couple of weeks ago from the Reagan Library, and peace through strength was everywhere. I mean, everywhere in that library were quotes that just got me in the feels, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that you know that once you have that reputational damage, you know that people are emboldened, and it feels like China is emboldened.
Boy, I think you've said it all right there. And you know, it's interesting. China has had the luxury of patience, something that a totalitarian government has, something we don't necessarily have. We live in 2, 4, 6-year tranches, right? And that's clumsy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. That said, their patience over the last 30 years to build slowly, to dominate slowly, to take advantage of our free and open system in many respects has been their strength. But we're to a point now where any sign of overt weakness could become that moment. Literally, when you talk to people in the Pacific, particularly whether it's other countries or our military in Indo-Pacific Comm, they'll tell you that what they do every day is they wake up and think, this is not the day. This is not the day.
Well, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit too. This is from a May 31st, 2018 video. It is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. They hosted a discussion on a congressional bill that would expand the committee and for CFIUS, which we are familiar with now because of the Fufeng thing. And the CFIUS is, of course, that government agency that reviews the potential foreign investment. And the clip, there was a gentleman who asked a question during this discussion panel. I want you to listen to the clip and react to it. Let's run it.
One of the things that we run across is the fact that when we go to look and see who the investors are, the limited partners in a venture capital structure, they're not required to be disclosed, right? The SEC doesn't require, because it's not a registered investment company, that they disclose the investors behind it. Usually they do, but in 23% of cases, at least that I've been able to find, it's an undisclosed investor. If you go through PitchBook, anywhere else, very difficult to locate, and in fact, the SEC isn't even collecting that data. So if I'm going to look for non-notified cases in the VC world, I'm already missing about a quarter of the investments. I don't see anything in the current bill that does anything to close that loophole. I guess it's something that would be addressed through the SEC.
So I'm wondering, of course, now how do we close that loophole? Because if a quarter of them are getting through, this is a huge problem.
So we actually did pass legislation, and had I anticipated this, I would have gotten the exact name of the legislation. We did pass legislation a couple of years after that.
Oh, good.
Because I'm on the banking committee, and so the question is exactly right. There were Chinese companies, particularly, who trade on American boards. It's right on our exchanges, but who are not subject to the same auditing standards that American companies are, including this disclosure of ownership. We changed that a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago even, maybe it was a couple of years, doesn't matter. And we did tighten that up. But to this point, again gets back to Fufeng a little bit. Remember, didn't take a lot of due diligence to identify that the chairman of Fufeng was not just a member, but an activist member, an honored member of the Chinese Communist Party. I've seen further intel on the rest of the board that should be made public. And I wish it could be, quite honestly, because I think that would settle it for a lot of people much earlier.
So interesting. Well, thank you for that answer too. The military readiness, in my view, has been hampered by things like CRT. They're having trouble right now recruiting people for the military. And I think it all stems from Biden's reaction. When you have a leader who is feckless and hapless and dangerous, why would you even enlist? So now we're in a situation where we're struggling. We're depleted because of mandates. We were depleted because of the CRT thing. Where are we going forward with our military?
Well, there's no question that the wokeness of this administration has been a deterrent for people, for patriotic Americans, perhaps some of the most patriotic Americans, because it's that spirit of independence, and it's their personal value that they think they bring to the fight that attracts them to the fight. And when you're saying, no, we don't want that, and you're prioritizing over lethality things like genders or pronouns, or whether you will get a vaccination or not, an untested vaccination or not, really violates the principles of the very people we want in the military. Now, having said that, Lori, it's really important to point out that there are a lot of really good people in the military, still, right. A lot of really good ones. But we have a shortage, and we should not be looking for ways to prune our military. We need to be looking for ways to attract more people to our military.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that too. There are so many other things that I want to talk to you about in 1 minute here. And things like, I would like to talk about natural gas pipelines. I want to talk to you about radioactive waste in North Dakota. There's so many things that are going on. 1 minute left here. Give me your view of where we are going as a state right now.
Sure. So there are a number of things. Pipelines are an important one, right? There's a combination of federal and state oversight on various pipelines. The thing we're probably watching the most closely as people is private property rights. You mentioned that as it relates particularly to the CO2 pipelines, because it's not as clear cut as other things. We need to be attentive to all of that. I think eminent domain, which is the boogeyman in all of this, should be the last thing ever used, if ever used. I never, in any pipeline that I ever cited as a Public Service Commission, did we ever have to have it, not an inch of it, including the original Keystone pipeline, never had to be condemned. And we need to get back to that and find more strategic ways to move important resources to the market without violating people's personal rights.
Fantastic as always. Thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
being on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate your insight on this program, and we'll have you back when you're in town again.
Well, let's do it.